as an entity that continued to grow, evolve, and produce, Outkast is on a level that is up there with the Beatles. The year is 1994 and hip-hop has cemented itself into the mainstream. In this series, we'll be discussing why this year is regarded as one of the greatest years in the history of rap. From New York icons like Nas and Biggie to the arrival of Southern rap in the form of Outkast or UGK, 94 was one of the biggest years in rap music. We'll look back at these classic albums, sharing why they're so great and why their impact meant so much to the culture. All right, man, let's get to it.
All right, Bo, why is Outkast's debut album on this list?
It kind of felt like the Chronic for the South when it came out. That's a description that I could give, and I don't even necessarily have the best explanation for exactly what I mean. Like, some of it is similar instrumentation and production style. Some of it is the fact that it was hard and it was funky, but it still had some hooks that you could get down with, right? It still had a melodic feel to it. But there was something about when this came out that when it dropped, it was different than anything that I could think of. It wasn't the beginning of rap in Atlanta. You'd had Raheem the Dream, MC Shy D, all kinds of cats in the 80s. It wasn't the first Atlanta rap act to go national because Arrested Development had already happened. Crisscross had already happened. But there was something organic and decidedly Southwest Atlanta about this that was an introduction to the world of the city that would ultimately become the center of rap music, replacing New York City. Like, this is the beginning of the future for rap. And I don't even think we realized that so much in 1994, but it's clear now that that is exactly what it was.
You talked about where Atlanta rap was before and how this changed it. Was it sound? Was it culture?
Jermaine Dupri makes the point that every song that comes out of Atlanta's got a little bit of Planet Rock in it. And that is largely true. Atlanta's a city that jumped all over hip hop when it hit, and it jumped all over hip hop in a real kind of B-boy sort of way, sonically, in terms of what people were into. And so you look at it moving out of the 80s and into the 90s, like Miami had its base. We call it Miami base because there was Atlanta base. Everybody else kind of had their own move to it. And Atlanta was in that direction, right? I would say in most cases, a lot more dance centered because Atlanta is a dancing city. They dancing ass dudes down there. They love that. Outkast was coming and it felt a lot more rooted in some of the East Coast hip hop sensibilities. So you add the instrumentation that you get out of the Rap-A-Lot stuff in Houston, plus what was coming out of the West Coast at the time. Then add to that flow in a lot of ways that reminded people of a lot of like the native tongues and hieroglyphic stuff, and put all that together with this decidedly Southern aesthetic. And yeah, this was different than anything that had come out.
Let's talk about Big Boi and Andre 3000 and why the two of them work so well and how they juxtapose each other.
So the interesting thing about Southern Playalistic is that as you get down the line with each passing album, you notice what the differences between Andre and Big Boi are, right? And you think of them as being opposite sides of a coin. It didn't feel that way so much on Southern Playalistic, right? These are two dudes that are basically still in high school. Their frames of reference and their levels of experience aren't terribly different from one another. They didn't seem to be like some split. They seemed to be like homeboys who were rapping. Big Gip makes the point, and he's probably right. You go back and listen to Southern Playalistic, Big Boi's the star of that record. Like, the lane that they're in and the stuff that they're talking about is really a lane that he was probably more comfortable with. It wasn't until later that we got this idea of Andre as being the God MC. He always had that voice, but it really wasn't until ATLians that it starts becoming something that people look at and they're like, okay, so why he got a Kango on and why is he wearing a turban? That wasn't what was going on at that point. You go back to that first album, they both got Kangos on, right? One of them is wearing a Braves jersey. It could be either one of them that was wearing a Braves jersey. This was not an Equimini split yet at this point. This was Southernplayalisticadillacmuzik. It was all mashing up together.
You just mentioned before the Planet Rock and the 70s funk soul inspirations, Organized Noize and the Dungeon Family. Let's get into just what made this album sound so good.
Rico Wade, Ray Murray, and Sleepy Brown, rest in peace to Rico Wade. They are the production trio of Organized Noize. For Rico Wade's mama's house, The Dungeon, where they would go into the basement and record pre-production stuff, right? This is the beginning of all the legend of the Dungeon Family. It all starts there. What they did production-wise on this was take drum machines and then use live instruments on top of it. They said that it made it feel more urgent. It made the music feel more present. And this was kind of a trademark thing that you saw from Dr. Dre and the cats out of the West Coast, and also in the similar way coming out of Houston with the Rap-A-Lot guys, was rather than just going everything with samples, bring in the live instruments when you can. And so when you go back and listen to that record, it feels richer, right? They didn't sacrifice any of the edge to the sound, but it just feels like a little bit more. It doesn't feel quite as raw as you get when guys were just using all samples and all the things you had to do to implement that. But it gave it a feel, it gave it a rhythm, it gave it a swing that was different than a lot of the rap that you were hearing even as late as 1994.
Let's go into your favorite tracks, favorite bars from this record.
Oh, dude, you have to understand something. Like, if we could take a moment to make this just a little bit personal, there's never been an album that I heard that hit me in the way that this did. Because I grew up in Houston, but I was born in Atlanta, and my brother and sister, they grew up in Atlanta, right? I knew Atlanta in a way that, honestly, growing up in northwest suburbs of Houston, I didn't really know Houston in that way. A lot of them streets that they throwing out on them Houston records, I don't know, because that shit is 45 minutes away from the house, man. It's far. But I know Campbellton Road. I know all the stuff that they were out here talking about on those Outkast records, and it jumped out to me the first time I heard it. I'd never heard anything that sounded like that. I never heard anything that felt as familiar as that. I'd never really heard dudes that were rapping like that. And it was also, interestingly enough, it had an edge of the streets, but this was not gangster rap. Like, you actually could listen to a lot of this around your mom, not all of it, but a lot of it around them. Man, when this dropped, I had never felt closer or more familiar with an album ever before in my life. But like, if you're talking about which song, it's almost like reading off the liner notes. My intro to let you know to start it off, like, the album got two intros. It's got the talking intro and then the rapping intro, and the rapping intro is incredible. The title track is incredible. Call it a Wild, just with all the Goody Mob dudes on there. Again, nobody's ever sounded like that. I just remember how hard that hit the first time I heard that. Players Ball, which is a reconfigured Christmas song and just turns into a pimpin' carol. That really good. Really enjoy it. Great one. Claiming True. The 1, 2, 3, that's how it be. That one goes hard. Crumbling Herb is probably my favorite song on the record. I'm skipping out of order. The fact that Crumbling Herb manages to be so ambient, but at the same time having such a clear, distinct feel, the way the bass comes in on that, the guitar play, all of that. Love that one. Get up, get out, get something. You have to appreciate 18-year-olds telling you to stop being lazy. I don't know how I would have felt at the time if I had to deal with these dudes trying to tell me to stop being lazy. You 18 years old, but apparently they was working hard. They got themselves a record deal and made everything happen. Maybe you did need to get your lazy ass off the couch and actually go do something with yourself. Funky Ride, which, in the middle of their rap album, they threw in like this quasi reggae sex song. And it goes, and it works. Hootie Hoo, where all you working with is a bass line and drums. Works. Deep, tad bit problematic, but sonically pleasant. All right, we'll just have to put it that way. That's probably the best way that we could go. Like, when I try to think about a bar on this, it's so hard for me because at my peak, I knew every single word at every single point on this album. I say this rap shit is really just like selling smoke. If you got some fire shit, your niggas gonna always go broke. I mean, just, oh my God. Like, it's from track 1 till the end. They were in the pocket on the flow. It felt like on every song. I talked about how Andre hadn't like reached the status of God MC yet, but you can hear the moments where it's coming, right? Where he's just in this place. I'm leaning back, my elbows out the window, coke, rum, and endo fills my body. Where's the party? That guy is coming. That guy is going to be the guy by the time this is all said and done. You hear that all the way through. Big Boi is giving you a different kind of maturity and sincerity in what he's talking about. Like, it's very clear this is a wise beyond his years 19-year-old dude that is rapping on every track. Coming off the top of Hootie Hoo, follow the funk from the skunk and the dank that is crunk in the dungeon. It goes on and on and on. And you're just there like, okay, I'm yours, right? I'm going to go wherever it is that you want me to go on this track. And that's what I think I probably associate with this record more than anything else, is jumping in and realizing I'm just going to go where they take me, which basically became what we let them do for their whole careers. I have no idea what these dudes are going to do at any given point in time. But all right, I'm going to just let you take me for the ride. You are the pilot. I am the passenger.
Let's talk about the critical reception, because it was met positively. It got 4.5 stars from Source, but it also famously, when they accepted the award for Best Newcomer, got booed on stage. Let's talk about the critical and cultural reception of this record.
Okay, so the critical reception of Southern Playalistic, some people are being a tad bit revisionist, I think. Overall, the reception was positive, and I think in a very important way, because as a Southern rap act, they were the first one to get big without starting from a position of novelty. Like, part of what made the Ghetto Boys so big is that they had been deemed too hot for TV, getting thrown off the label for being a little bit too profane and grotesque. And so there was a legend that built around them. You got Crisscross, but they kids. You got Arrested Development, but they out there wearing dashikis and shit. Like, this is a little bit different. There was nothing about this to get people on except for the fact that, oh, these dudes are out here rapping. And they managed to get it an extra push by handing out free samples to people during Freaknik in 94. It's a very important point in the development of the legend of this album. But overall, it was positive because I think it had just enough of the sensibilities of what was going on in all parts of the map for everybody to get on board with it. So New York was the critical center of the industry, obviously. So the flow and the obvious Q-Tip influence that you can hear all the way through that record, that gets the New Yorkers on something they can buy into. The instrumentation is something that the folks on the West Coast and the rest of the South can happen to get into. Russell Simmons, for example, said it took him a year before he understood it. He deemed that it wasn't hip hop because his New York ears couldn't appreciate the fact that the sound had moved out of New York and that something that sounded like that could still be hip hop. For a lot of people, there was still an adjustment process. But keep in mind, we don't like this dude right now for obvious reasons, but the Players Ball video is directed by Puffy Combs. New York figured this out and got on board with it in a different way than I think it had ever really gotten on board with a record that came from outside of its boundaries. This is also kind of at the beginning of the era where the idea of like rap going to Atlanta, where it just be rappers buying houses in Atlanta or anything else, had become something aspirational. And Outkast honestly became something to give them a road back for the life that they were seeking and never knew that they wanted. Now, I will say this about those Source Awards. We're talking to people who were there. They was going to boo anybody that came on stage. It was a very tense night, guys. It was a lot going on. I don't think anybody was actually booing Outkast. I think they had just got in the habit of booing shit. And then they decided, yeah, we're going to boo them too. I love they tape though. And then they went and they got the boo. And it comes with the infamous Andre line, South got something to say, and that's all I got to say, which interestingly was not really memorialized that night. It became memorialized when they added it on Aquemini at the back end of Chunky Fire. That's when it became a big thing. But the South as a force in rap had not been nearly as established then as it is now. There's a whole generation that can't even probably understand the idea of generational divides in music because the music doesn't even sound regional anymore. But the notion of some dudes with those accents, wearing those clothes, talking about those things was downright revolutionary in 1994. And to say, regardless of the circumstances, we here and we not going nowhere, not only was a big deal, it turned out to legitimately be prophetic.
30 years later, what is the legacy of this album?
So to me, the legacy of this album, number one, is it is right up there with albums like Illmatic, Mobb Deep's The Infamous, which is very, very adult, grown-up records made by teenagers. Like where you listen to it and you don't think about the fact that, this is for real a teenager that I am listening to. That's that part. Number two, it is the introduction of Atlanta hip hop on a true nationwide scale, an introduction of Atlanta hip hop to the radio all over America, right? To the visuals and people getting a look at what the city was. That city now is what New York was to rap. It is now the center of the culture. That begins with Southernplayalisticadillacmuzik. That makes Southernplayalistic one of the most important, forget about rap records ever made, because it truly is the beginning of showing people something that they hadn't seen before and something that they ultimately wanted to get to. And it is the debut of, without question, the greatest rap group ever. Yeah, you could say the NWA had Cube and everything else, and they put out a lot of heat between all of them, and that's fine. But as an entity that continued to grow, evolve, and produce, Outkast is on a level that is up there with the Beatles, right? They're up there on a level at the top with any creative group duo that you could ever think of that not just reach peak forms of their genre, but continue to push it to places that no one else within it had even considered would be possible. Prize Picks is really simple to play. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So make sure you go to prizepicks.com/Bomani and use code Bomani for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/Bomani. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.